we good, Chris? Yes, good. Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to look and get my cues and my high signs. And welcome to the Jewel. I'm Cindy Malinek, and I'm the director of Auburn University's Art Museum, and we are just thrilled to have you all, and again, partner with Dr. Harrell and College of Liberal Arts. We're glad you're here with us in person. We're also live streaming this, so I hope we have lots of folks out in the world that are also joining us. We're just so thrilled to be doing this again, collaborating on becoming the beloved community in commemoration of the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. through hosting this series of intergenerational, interdisciplinary, interfaith discussions. We're grateful to be a part of this initiative on this 55th anniversary of his assassination, as we help prepare our students for life and leadership in a multicultural world. Before we begin, and as we do with all of our engagements, though, I'd first like to acknowledge the history and stewardship of the original homelands of the territory of the Creek indigenous peoples on which Auburn University is sited. Descended from the mound builders of the Mississippi River Valley, they lived here, raised their families, and farmed until they were forcibly removed during the Trail of Tears. A clan of these people, the Porch Band, remain to the south of us, and no doubt their enduring relationship with this place continues. I call forth the Creek because it's important for us to always seek to understand our place in the world within that longstanding history. We have a profound evening ahead, but I do hope, here's my shameless plug, that you take a few minutes and explore the galleries and the art that's on exhibit, some from the university's own art collection and some on loan to us. The exhibitions reflect some of the simple yet elegant legacy of the people of Alabama through their pottery, in juxtaposition with the astonishing ceramics by the Japanese artist Masayomi Yasunaga, as well as spiritualism and shared or not experiences seen in Invisible Thread and Migratory Roots. As a university art museum, we offer the opportunity for faculty to teach with objects and for students and all visitors to explore and wonder and consider and question, including about some of the thoughts and concepts that this gathering raises. I often say that museums should be and are brave places that offer nourishment for the soul, replenish the spirit, and raise one's consciousness. I trust that the Jewel will serve in that regard for you all tonight. I'd be remiss as well if I didn't note that scholar, landscape architect, and professor at the University of California, Berkeley, Walter Hood, who'll be on Zoom with us tonight, is a collaborator of ours. We'll be working with him on a 20th anniversary project later this fall, so stay tuned for that, but we're thrilled that he's going to be with us tonight as well. I extend my deepest appreciation to our organizing partners and the entire museum staff. What a great team we have here, and for all of their efforts in bringing this evening to fruition. And I'm also grateful to our seasoned partners who invest in these kinds of programs. We couldn't do it without them. My sincerest thanks also goes to Interim Provost Dr. Vinnie Nathan and to President Christopher B. Roberts. Everyone be well. Have a great evening. And now let me introduce Dr. Jason Hicks, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for that welcome. And this time at the Jewel is always welcome and enjoyable, so I hope you all enjoyed as much as I have and will later into the evening. I really am glad to see you all here and glad to represent the College of Liberal Arts at Auburn University, again on this 55th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. I wanted to also acknowledge the many partners in this work and in these endeavors with the Becoming the Beloved programming. Obviously the College of Liberal Arts, the Carolyn Marshall Drawn Center for the Arts and Humanities, the Jewel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Arts, of course, And within the College of Liberal Arts, the School of Communication and Journalism, the Department of Philosophy, and our program in Africana Studies. These are all partners in this endeavor, and we are especially proud to be a part of that. It is my honor to also then introduce our next speaker. As was already briefly introduced, Dr. Vinnie Nathan is our interim provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. She took that position in March of 2022, last year. Since 2011, Dr. Nathan has served as Dean of the McWhorter Chair of the College of Architecture, Design, and Construction. She is also a tenured professor of architecture and interior architecture and is a senior fellow of the Design Futures Council. As interim provost, she is the university's chief academic officer and oversees the university's tripartite mission, including providing the academic supervision of Auburn's campus, working with faculty, staff, students, alumni, and other stakeholders. She ensures that the university maintains the highest possible scholarly activity, outreach, and teaching and learning programs. In carrying out these responsibilities, she works directly with the deans of our 12 colleges, the university's shared governance groups, university administrators, student leaders, and other provost office team members. Prior to being at Auburn, she held the position of dean and professor in the School of Architecture at Thomas Jefferson University. As an architect working with the Walker Group in New York, she collaborated with Cesar Pelli Associates on the design of the Kuala Lumpur City Center in Malaysia. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Vinnie Nathan.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I bring greetings from Chris Roberts, the president of the university. Chris would have so loved to have been here at this event. He's flying back from San Francisco, so he sends his remarks through me and his regards through me. I have a really poetic script that was written by Joan Harrell, but some of you who know me know that I just look at a script and then I ad-lib. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. I just felt that was when I learned a little bit more about what being the beloved community was, as much as it was about empathy and openness and inclusiveness and recognizing each other for who we are. I felt it was also a call to be authentic, and I felt if I came here and read a piece of paper, that would so not be me. So I am going to say it's a delight and honor to be here. This event, this is an annual event, becoming the beloved community. I wanted to make sure I got it right. Is in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy, his life, and his philosophy. His philosophy was both poetic and profound. He believed in an empathetic approach that saw each human being for who they are, and also held and demanded that each human being contribute and gain from the community that they belong to. I think that this is a pretty high and wonderful bar for all of us at Auburn to aspire to every day, how we contribute to and become part of this incredible community that we all call home. This event is an annual event that allows us to have conversations on tough topics, important topics that are both complex and complicated, but hopefully we leave here both provoked and challenged and encouraged to see things from different perspectives. So again, it is an honor for me to be here. This evening, we are going to see an intersection of music, lived history, landscape architecture, and media coming together through lived experiences to talk about what are the ingredients that could possibly make a beloved community. So to all of you, my beloved community, I say thank you and welcome. Is on tap for our next performance. So come in, please.
Namaste, good evening, everybody. We're honored to be, thank you. We're honored to be a part of this wonderful event today. And Gandhi ji called out to people to live up to their highest self, and millions responded. And with those teachings, around the other side of the world, Dr. Martin Luther King was able to bring about social change, revolutionary social change, with a message of peace. To honor these great men, because of whom we're enjoying a lot of privileges today, we're going to present Gandhiji's favorite bhajans or songs. The first one literally encompasses his ideology when it says that to be a good human being, one has to feel the pain of other people. And having helped others, you shouldn't let ego enter the mind. So that's Vaishnava Janato, our first song. वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जानी रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जानी रे। पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नानी रे। पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नानी रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जानी रे। सकल लोक मां सहुने वंदे निंदा न करे तेनी रे। सकल लोक मां सहुने वंदे निंदा न करे केनी रे। वाच काच मन निश्चल राखे जन जन जननी तेनी रे। वाच काच मन निश्चल राखे धन धन जननी तेनी रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जानी रे। पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नानी रे। वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जानी रे। Moving on to our last song, it's Raghupati Raghava Rajaram. This was also one of Gandhiji's favorite songs, and in this song there's a special mention towards peace between different religions. And this song was a big part of his peace rallies. People would join in, and you had thousands of people singing this together, clapping along. So we'll be happy if you guys can also join in, tapping your foot or clapping, whatever way you can. रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। सीताराम जय सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम। सीताराम जय सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरो नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान। ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरो नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। जय जय रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। सीताराम जय सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम। सीताराम जय सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। जय जय रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम, पतित पावन सीताराम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
Thank you so much to our Auburn University Indian Ensemble. We appreciate you. Now at this time, we are going to hopefully go through another musical delight. Not in a musical sense of instruments and song, but with writing. I know, crazy, right? We are going to meet two journalists. And they're going to tell us a little bit about the Clotilda. May I introduce Darron Patterson and Ben Raines. To these wonderful men tonight. All right. Thank you again for being with us. Really appreciate it.
No, it's great to be here.
Oh, wonderful. Is this your first time at Auburn?
This is my first time at Auburn. I do have a cousin who's fairly distant who was the keeper of the War Eagle back in the 80s. But this is my first time here at Auburn. So
Okay, wonderful. And I know this is not your first time.
I've been at Auburn quite a bit, and as soon as I can figure out how to turn this mic on.
You can have mine.
Okay. Been at Auburn quite a bit as a sports writer. Me and Ben worked at the same newspaper at different times, but I used to cover the SEC. I covered Auburn back in the Pat Dye era and Alabama back when Bear Bryant was coaching. That was my first foray into covering the SEC.
All right, so you are no stranger to Auburn
By no
University.
means. By no means.
Wonderful. If you could, can you tell us why we are here tonight?
Well, for one thing, I'm here because I wanted to make sure that there are some points that need to be heard about where we are at this point. Dr. Nathan said she does not want you to leave here unless you're provoked. It is important that you understand where we are now with the find of Clotilda, the reckoning point that we have going on in the world right now for oppressed people. And who better to talk about oppressed people than a descendant of the last illegal load of Africans brought here for the purpose of enslavement? That's my thought. My pastor always says, never leave here the way you came in. It's important that you do not leave here tonight the way you came in here. There are things you need to know and things you need to hear, and I'm sure that by the time me and Ben get through, you will have heard a lot of them.
So I noticed you made a mention to the ship, but if you could, can you take us back for those people who may not know the existence of this ship that was found?
The Clotilda was the last ship that was commissioned to bring an illegal load of Africans to America for the purpose of enslavement. Ben actually found the ship in 2018. The ship had been a rumor in my community for years. My great-great-grandfather, Cooperly, was on that ship. He and 109 of his closest friends. And I can always think about when they came up the Mobile River, how they looked at each other, and a lot of them didn't know each other. They were from different tribes. And they looked at each other, and at that point, they were 14, 15, 16, young men and women. They had been handcuffed, shackled together for 2 months, butt naked, eating where they crapped, sleeping where they crapped, only allowed on deck for 1 day a week so their muscles wouldn't atrophy. And I keep thinking to myself, the inhumanity of it all. Who does people like that? I don't care what color you are. See, and that's the thing we got to get to now. It doesn't matter what color we are. That's the point we've got to get to understand. It doesn't matter what color we are. We are here to live together to make this a better place for everybody. I always say that covering sports helped me understand teamwork. Teamwork. As long as you got the same color jersey on, we're on the same team. Our jersey just happens to be red, white, and blue. We need to get that straight and stop worrying about what color you are and where you're from and what you look like. We have to understand that we are the same people. We're Americans. And we are here to make sure that the people coming behind us, my granddaughter, your children, have a better place to live. My daddy always said, it's going to be better for you. It's going to be better for you. I said, Daddy, why is it sign white in color? He said, don't worry about it. It's going to be better for you. It's better, but it sure is not where we need to be. And I appreciate the fact that God has intervened in this thing. Clotilda is not an accident. Clotilda was found for a reason. And that's to make sure that we all get our ears standing up straight and recognize what's in front of us and what we have to do to live together.
Thank you so much. Now to Ben, believe you just said you discovered the ship in 2018. How was that process? I imagine it was arduous.
The process of discovering the ship was somewhat arduous because first I found the wrong ship and wrote a story that went viral internationally about this wreck found by a reporter may be the Clotilda, the last slave ship. Of course, later it was proven it wasn't, so I was kind of internationally humiliated. So that was, a rough spot in the discovery. But before we talk more about the ship, I want to say a little something about the people on it and why we're going to talk about Clotilda at all. And it's because it's so unique. The reason Clotilda is so unique is because by 1860, when it came in on the eve of the Civil War, it had been illegal to import people to enslave them for 52 years, since 1808, a law passed by Thomas Jefferson. And so by the time of the Civil War, almost all the enslaved people in the United States had been born in the United States. They had been born into slavery. So with the Clotilda happening in 1860, we get kind of this window back in time because the people who were enslaved at that point didn't know Africa. They hadn't been through the Middle Passage. So the Clotilda arriving in 1860, as Darron mentioned, the people were very young. They were between 12 and 30 for the most part, and they lived for a really long time. So they were only enslaved for about 5 years. Because the Clotilda was this illegal mission, the man who did it, a steamboat captain from Mobile named Timothy Mayer, he did it to thumb his nose at the government before the war. He was pushing to reopen the slave trade. That was one of the goals of the South in the war. So it was written about as soon as the ship came in because he had been bragging about what he was doing, this illegal crime, which he could be hung for. So he got interviewed over and over after the war as the last slaver, and the media treated him as this sort of swashbuckling hero. But everybody who came to write about Timothy Mayer also wrote about Africatown, which we've been seeing these pictures of, which was a town started by the people who arrived on the Clotilda. When they were freed, they banded together and earned money and then bought some land, and they took turns building each other houses. And they built a school, and they built a church. So people would come to interview Timothy Mayer, and they'd go see the Africans in Africatown, and they would write about them. And Africatown became more and more famous. Because of that, these people on the ship were interviewed over and over. Cujo Lewis, the most famous of them, lived until 1935. So what we get here is a time capsule where we learn about the 400 years of enslavement from the mouths of these people who were enslaved. We hear about what their lives were like in Africa from their own mouths, from interviews conducted when 10 of them were still alive. The big interview was in 1914. So they talk about how much they missed Africa, how great their lives were. Their families owned property in Africa. They had trades. One of them was a furniture maker, one was a commercial fisherman. And so they talked about that aspect of it. Then they talked about the raid where they were captured, which was incredibly gruesome and brutal, much more, I think, than any of us could imagine until you hear it from their own mouths. They talked about life in the Barracoon. They talked about the Middle Passage. Then they talked about their time as enslavement. And then they were freed. So for everybody whose ancestors arrived here in the hold of a ship, they can only go back in their history to, if they're lucky, the plantation their ancestors were enslaved on. But with the Clotilda people, we get sort of a proxy version of the story, that if your ancestors arrived in a ship, you can read about what happened to the people on the Clotilda, know of their lifelong heartache for the lives and people they left behind. It's the origin story for the African diaspora. And that's why it's so important. It's not just that it's the last slave ship. It's the ship with the people. We know more about the people on the ship than is known about any group of enslaved people in our history. So that's why the ship's so important. That's why we need to dig it up out of the river and put it on display in Mobile, in a museum in Africatown, and tell the story of these 110 people and the ship they came in on. It'll be unlike anything else in the world, this museum we could have here in Alabama.
I laugh because Ben always talks about bringing the ship out of the water. And if they can raise Viking ships, they can raise this thing, okay? It all depends on the commitment of the state of Alabama and what they want to do. That's what's important. You know, me and Ben have been at this for a while now. You know, we have this traveling thing that we do. And
It's a juggling act.
yeah, and I understand exactly what he's saying. And I've come to understand what it will take to get that ship out of the water. It can come out of the water. I'm not an archaeologist, but I know that the right amount of effort, the right amount of commitment, the right amount of money can bring Clotilda out of the water. Ben said something I want to expound on, if you don't mind. The transatlantic slave trade went on for 341 years, I believe. And 12 million Africans were brought to America against their will. Another 1 million of those are on the bottom of the ocean, thrown overboard for sickness, disease, unruliness, to make a point to others, to make sure that they stayed in line. I keep going back to the inhumanity of it all. Every time I go down the Mobile River, I put myself in that cargo hold where my great-great-grandfather was. And I wonder when I look around and see things in my mind, just what I would have done in the cargo hold of that ship. Those were some remarkable people. We did an interview with Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes, and I told him, how many people do you know that could have survived a 2-month voyage butt naked under those conditions and still kept their mind? These people were remarkable, regardless of what Dr. Josiah Knott said, who said that they were cut below a dog. Famous surgeon from Mobile, brilliant surgeon, terrible idiot. And
I believe he started the first medical school.
He did. He was a brilliant surgeon. But back then, he made sure that the people bought into the theory that black people were not nearly equal to white people. Remember, black people only brought here to be servants. Oops. There was no plan B. So now I go back again. We've got to figure this out. And yes, Harriet, it's going to take white people to fix white people. It's going to take white people to say, that is wrong. What are you doing with these classified documents here? Oh, no, I didn't mean to say that. What are you doing? That's not right. That is not right. We can't do it. It's going to take a population of people to say, you know what? We've been at this too long. We've been at this too long now. Let's get this right. I want it right for my granddaughter, your grandchildren.
And I just want to follow on Darron for a minute there. Next week will be the 5th anniversary of the day that I found the ship, and that you see me holding that piece of it up in the 5 years. The state of Alabama has conducted one measly archaeological mission of any consequence. And all they did was basically certify that the bottom around the ship was firm and that the ship itself is quite intact. You know, they are dragging their feet horrendously. The idea that we're not in the process of digging up the ship after 5 years, you know, and I believe this ship is being held hostage by state officials who don't want to dig it up because of what it represents. And, you know, with something like this, history, sometimes the only way to move forward is to confront the past. And so here we have this object that represents all these people. And, you know, it's time for it to see the light of day. So now we'll yield back.
Oh, my turn. Out of curiosity, why do you think that the state is dragging their feet? In your opinion?
Because of the complete lack of progress.
Right.
Because the state archaeologist, Stacey Haythorne, there was a documentary National Geographic made about the Clotilda. It's not very good, but if you watch it, pay attention to the state archaeologist, this woman, Stacey Haythorne. She suggests over and over preserving in situ for the Clotilda. That means to leave it rotting in the mud. She never once talks about digging it up. That's why I think the state is dragging their feet. And, you know, if this had happened in another state, I don't think we'd be in this position. But this is an internationally important artifact. There have only been a handful of slave ships ever found. This is the only one ever found that was in the American trade. There is a piece of a slave ship in the Smithsonian Museum. It is a South African ship that sank in port in Brazil. So here is this artifact. You know, we're here on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. I quote someone in my book, The Last Slave Ship, in Africa Town, and he talks about when he went to the Lorraine Motel and saw where Dr. King was assassinated, he cried. And he said, that's the same with the ship. When people see that ship, they're going to cry. And he's right. And so that's the history. Incidentally, today, I will say that many people of my generation remember the day Dr. King died because of a U2 song. The lyrics are, early morning, April 4, a shot rings out. I just want to correct the record. It wasn't early morning, but these guys were Irish. You know, we should applaud them for remembering Dr. King. But
You know, and I want to say this, you know, we all remember where we were when certain things happened. I had a white friend getting beat up by some of my black friends the day Martin Luther King was shot and killed. And they told me he was getting beat up in the stadium. I ran to the stadium and said, wait a minute, guys. And the guys who were beating him up were some of my football teammates. And I'm like, hold on a minute. This guy didn't have anything to do with that. This guy didn't have anything to do with that. And this is the mindset. This is the mindset that has been instilled in America for years. We gotta figure this out. We gotta figure this out. And we need everybody, we need all hands on deck to help us figure this out. We can't go on like this. That's my plea every time I get a chance to hold a microphone. Please, don't leave here like you came in here. Don't leave here. There are things that we have to do to fix this country. And back to Ben's point about why the ship is not raised, this is the Old South. Let's just get real about this. This is the Old South. Newsflash, you lost the war. Okay? It's over. It's over.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was giggling. You know, I'm from Mobile, Alabama. Okay, so I did a little giggle. And yes, you have to excuse you too for their creative license. But let's talk about the people. All right, let's talk about the people. We talked a little bit about the past and what happened, but let's talk about the community that's there now, the people that are there now. Can we speak on that?
Yes, we can. I'm very blessed to have been raised by the daughters and granddaughters of the people off that ship. Nobody has to tell me who they were. I walked with them. I was raised by them. I ate their food. I smelled them. I touched them. They're real. And when I was growing up, the community was just great. I mean, I was raised by the entire community. You Miss Patterson's son? Boy, you better stop. You Miss Patterson's son? I'm gonna tell your mama. And we had the respect to stop doing what we were doing. My great-great-grandfather, Cooperly, was a beekeeper. He was a woodworker. He was a really cool dude. He really was. He did a lot of things. He was one of the mayors, if you will, of Africatown, along with Cujo and Osiah Keeby. They were the guys who settled disputes and took care of things when people got a little too rowdy on a Friday night. But the prevailing attitude in the community is something I have never, ever witnessed since. And I'm sure there's a lot of close-knit communities, but nothing like Africatown. We never had to leave the community. Only time we left the community was to pay utility bills. I remember once that a furniture salesman called my mother while my father was at work, and my mother was all distraught when my father came home, and he said, well, what's the matter? She said, well, this guy called me. And so my daddy said, come on, let's go. Because he always took me with him to show me how men handle things. And he went down to that furniture company. He told that guy, he said, don't you ever call my house again and talk to my wife about a bill about nothing. I really don't think we paid another furniture bill for a long time, if at all. Because this was the way the men in that community, they walked and they taught you how to shake a man's hand and how to treat a woman and how to talk and say things. Mobile County Training School was built by the Africans to teach the little Africans how to be grown men and grown women. And I contend that the word training school was purposeful. They trained us to go out into the world. They didn't want us to think about where we came from. They wanted us to worry about where we were going. And they trained us at that school. Alfred July, all 6'6" of him, walking down the hall, straight up, teaching young men how to be young black men. And then we went out into the world and we did things. We've done some things. People at Mobile County Training School who graduated from there are some of the greatest people you will ever meet in your life. And that community is what we're going to try to make sure people understand. We'll be back regardless. I happen to now be talking to the chief fundraiser for Brian Stevenson, he of the lynching memorial in Montgomery. And I also talked to people who built that facility. And they told me to come back when you have $20 million. I told them I'll be back. Not sure when, but I'll be back. So that community, you have to come. You have to see it. Let me know when you come and I'll be there waiting for you.
But if I could follow a little on what Darron said, the community he grew up in has been decimated. And it's been decimated intentionally by the state of Alabama and the city of Mobile. It is a victim of environmental racism. It's one of the most extreme and egregious examples you can find in the nation. The largest paper mill in the world was built right there in Africatown. But, this was a slow process. When Darron was young, there were 12,000 people in the community. They had barbershops, dry cleaners, grocery stores, doctors, you name it. Now there are 2,000 people and there's not a single business left. And the main agent of the change was the city of Mobile and the state building a highway through the heart of town. And they did it to get hazardous waste so it wouldn't go through the heart of downtown Mobile anymore. They said, well, let's just send it through the heart of Africatown. So in 1992, they built a giant high-rise bridge, which I've seen, and that's it right there. Good timing, whoever. They built this bridge. When they built it, it went from being a 2-lane road with a drawbridge to this bridge approaches a half-mile long. It's 350 feet tall. When they did that, they destroyed all the homes that were left of the original founders. Cujo Lewis's home, 1992. Cujo's descendants were living in the house. The descendants of the other people that Darron's talked about, Poli, Kupali, their descendants were living in those houses too. And they were kicked out. Can you imagine? 1992 this happened. And then we look at the environmental damage. In the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, Mobile, Alabama, the county of Mobile County, was one of the top 5 counties in the nation for air and water pollution. Now that's a lot of pollution, top 5 in the nation. But if you break it down further and you take the Africatown zip code, Africatown is 6 square miles. Mobile County is several hundred thousand. If you take, not 100,000, several thousand. If you take these Africatown zip code, 100% of the hydrogen chloride coming out, emitted in Mobile County was in Africatown. 100% of the chlorine. Go down this list of gases. So Mobile was not the top 5 county. The tiny zip code of Africatown was ranking against the top 4 most polluted counties in the nation. So that's what happened to Africatown. Now we're trying to talk about how to bring it back. And that's where the museum comes in, because that will bring people to Africatown. And that can restore the commercial district. And so the ship and the people on it can become the vehicle to save the community that the people started.
You know what's really sad part, Ben, is that right now, Africatown could generate millions of dollars in tourist money and income for the city of Mobile. Nobody's coming to Mobile anymore to see Bellingrath Gardens. I mean, it's a great place, but I mean, they're not coming in mass and.
I think you're overselling it.
Yeah, well, okay. But nobody's coming there to see the deep sea fishing rodeo.
Maybe Mardi Gras.
Maybe, but Mardi Gras, yeah, maybe Mardi Gras, but Mardi Gras is not sustaining. Africatown could be a sustaining community year-round. I like Old Town in Montgomery. It's restored to the period. I see Africatown looking like that. But you got to have a commitment. City of Mobile has no commitment. And I'm tired of this tacit approval that they have. They're only doing things when the lights are on. You know, the mayor only shows up when the lights are on. I talk to the mayor all the time. I have nothing against the mayor other than the fact that he is non-committal to something that can help his community.
Isn't it true that he does own several pieces of land in Africatown, the mayor of Mobile?
Well,
Not properties per se.
there's a lumber mill that his family owns. And it actually, it's one of the fascinating things. If you go to Africatown, they're the old neighborhoods, and one of them is called Lewis Quarters. And Lewis Quarters is a community of about 12 houses that are completely surrounded by the lumber mill. You drive through the lumber mill to get to these houses where the people live. And this was, Lewis Quarters was Charlie Lewis, one of the original people off the ship. That's the land that he and his descendants bought. And so yes, the mayor is mixed up in this, but so is Old Mobile. This is, Mobile is this weird sort of place where, the Science Museum, the School of Math and Science, new library, the opera, the ballet and the symphony, these are all funded with fortunes from the people who still have all the cotton money that their families got back in the 1800s.
And speaking of that money and the mayor family, which is still extremely prominent in Mobile, have they ever apologized or come forth and said, I realize this happened, this is something that my ancestors did, but let me help you with this project now?
Well, now we can break it down there. They have sort of made some fits and starts in the last 2 months or so of trying to say, after refusing for the last 165 years. But that key part you said about the money, no, that hasn't happened. The Mayer family, this is different from the mayor of Mobile, that's M-A-Y-O-R. The Mayer family is the people who paid for this whole caper. They, instead of doing what you're doing, they own huge swaths of vacant land in Africatown, where in 1968, they tore down 500 houses that they had been renting to the people of Africatown. And they did it to punish them because the city of Mobile brought water service to Africatown finally. And so they tore the houses down. So, it's kind of the opposite of what you're saying. More recently than that, the mayor of Mobile, Sandy Stimson, teamed up with the Mayer family to donate for, what was it, $300,000 or something? This crappy old rundown credit union building that the mayors had been using to extract money from the community. It had been abandoned since, I think, the 80s. So the mayor of Mobile makes a big deal of buying it and giving it to Africatown. And the building was in such terrible shape, it had to be condemned. So that's the gift so far from the Mayer family.
That's lovely.
Well, but the thing about it is that I hate it when people try my intelligence. Don't you hate it when people try your intelligence? You say, are you seriously trying my intelligence? This has been the white man's game plan for years. Okay? And it's time out for that. It's time out for you to throw a bone and we're supposed to be happy. Ain't nobody happy. Okay? We know what the deal is. So stop trying our intelligence. That's the irritating part to me. You're trying our intelligence. You come and throw this thing at us and say, oh my God, look what we're giving you. This building's not worth a crap. And the building was so bad, I think it's condemned, it gotta be torn down. It would cost more to renovate it than it would be to use it. So now it's worthless. Stop trying our intelligence. We're not stupid. We are highly intelligent people. Highly intelligent. Stop trying our intelligence, Sandy Stimson. Stop trying our intelligence, state of Alabama. Stop trying our intelligence, United States of America. We are not foolish. We are proud Black people who just want you to understand that you brought us here. Now we got to figure out how we all live together. Cut it out. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
You needed to vent, and it's okay.
I got it out.
All right. I think we're kind of nearing our time here, but I want to ask one last thing, or I should say, mention one last thing. We had the opportunity to take a trip to Mobile, outside of Mobile, to Africatown. And the first thing I immediately noticed was the caustic smell. And I kept thinking how many times people had to deal with that awful mixture of burnt wood and sulfur in some cases.
Not just burnt wood and sulfur. We had a meat packing plant that smelled of holy hell when I was growing up. They made great hot sausages, I will say that, but it smelled of holy hell. This is the kind of stuff that we were forced to deal with in Africatown. Okay, International Paper Company, they would spew this stuff into the air, and when we hung our clothes on the line to dry, we'd have to run out to get them because of the yellow stains that were coming out of the air, the stains that were rusting car paint, eating car paint. And International Paper Company's answer to it was to give us a free car wash. Thank you.
Can you imagine living somewhere where just the air landing on your car ate the paint off of it? The cancer rates in Africatown have been extraordinary through all
Extremely
of this.
huge. My grandfather lived in that area, who also passed away from lung cancer at a very early age, I believe in 1992.
And that's when the paper mills were still going,
Yes,
gangbusters.
yes. And actually, he worked for International Paper for a very long time.
Yeah, another thing
And,
that they
yeah.
did, you can work here. Put some people in the community to work. God, Jesus, I could just.
One last question. Well, maybe I should just wrap this up. One last question. Okay, thank you. Tell us a little bit about the fact that there may be a film or a movie company or film production crew that's coming to the area.
Oh, God, here
I
we
think
go.
this is a
Yeah.
crazy
Oh,
boondoggle,
God.
but
Here we go
And
again.
let me just say that we've already stated that there aren't any businesses in the area. There's not any grocery stores, not any places. If you have a tickle in your throat, you can go to a clinic and get antibiotic. So there's none of that there, but there's a possible film
Have
production.
you seen where the big film places are in Atlanta? They're not in the heart of an industrial corridor because it's too loud. And, the idea that they're going to start making movies in this supposed $600 million facility in Africatown is, to me, I went to film school. I'll just confess that right now. That's my education. It's, to me, crazy. And the spot they're talking about doing it is right where we want to put the museum. It's a 42-acre spot that was a housing project in Africatown that was land stolen from residents of Africatown in 1960. The housing project became totally derelict by the 90s. At the paper, we used to write about murders there all the time and stuff. The city let it fall apart so badly, it was condemned finally, and in 2010. In 2019, the city went in and raised it. So now there's 42 acres in the heart of Africatown, and that's where we talk about putting a museum. You could recreate the commercial district of Africatown right by the museum. Darron has a fabulous idea to put a lake in there and put a replica of the ship so people could go on board and experience the conditions in the hold where the passengers were chained around the neck in groups of 8, as he said, naked. So, a movie theater, that's just a bizarre plan from a former mayor of Mobile.
It's not sustainable. I mean, we're looking for something to sustain the growth of the community. We're not looking for you to dangle a shiny object in front of us and we go, oh, wait, shiny object, Try intelligence again. It's not, oh man. We have to have sustainability to bring the community back. There are so many people who want to help do things to help us do this. And I'm meeting them every day. We cannot be fooled by shiny objects. We cannot be fooled by people trying our intelligence. We cannot be fooled by people still thinking that the old South is run by the people with the most money. We can't. We have got to figure this out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time.
We thank you, our beloved brothers, Darron Patterson, descendant of the Clotilda, Ben Raines, who is our brother friend of the Clotilda. Without Ben, we would not have known that the Clotilda was actually in existence. Is that correct? And to Lori Spradley, our wonderful new colleague with us in Becoming the Beloved Community. Thank you. So greetings to you. I'm Joan Harrell, I humbly say the founder of Becoming the Beloved Community. At this moment, I'd just like for you to be quiet for a moment. If you're physically able, please close your eyes. Darron's great-great-grandfather and 109 other children, because he said they were 14, 15, 16 years old. Quoting Darron, they were butt naked, chained to a ship, thousands of miles away from home, where they had been kidnapped. Can you see them? They were dropped off literally in the swamp of Mobile in the dark of night. Can you see them? Can you hear the water waves? Can you hear them breathing? Children, 14, 15, 16 years old. Now, as you open your eyes, I'd like for you to intentionally think about something else that Darron says. It is going to take you, the community, to make a difference, to change this narrative, or begin to chip at this narrative. And that's what Becoming the Beloved Community is all about. We cannot do this work alone. It's hard work. And so within this context of not working alone, we also have Becoming the Beloved Community partners. And one of those partners is Governor State University. They've been with us for the past 72 hours. Unfortunately, they had to leave to return to classes. But they began this work with us last year this time. And can someone tell me what time it is right now, please? 6:40? 6:40. So 55 years ago, "38 minutes ago, perhaps. I must admit, I'm not good at math, but I do know this. 55 years ago at 6:08 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. was shot dead. 55 years ago at this time, the world was hearing that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the drum major for justice, was dead. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a descendant, not of the Clotilda, but of enslaved Africans. So we had this opportunity to begin this process of working together with other media students, Africana students, studies students, social workers, social work students, with Governor State University, and we were able to begin working on a documentary series entitled Becoming the Beloved Community Civil Rights Tour. And this is a documentary that reveals our time together, starting out with the Clotilda, descendants of the Clotilda, moving on through the Lynching Museum in Montgomery. So I'd like for you to sit back and witness with us what this journey was like, and we'll come back, as we say, on the other side. Becoming the Beloved Community, the Civil Rights Tour.
Some young, some old, all white. There are at least 1,000, the sons of America. They've ripped one man, a father, a brother, a son, from his home. They've tortured him, mutilated his lifeless body, and hung him in a tree. The scene is excruciatingly loud, but also eerily silent. I pause there. We mourn. There is a silence, this time filled with healing. It gives room for all to listen and be heard. Then comes the sound of an exhale, a release. The somber photo plays like another dimension within my hands. The men of the crowd are now awake and aware. They turn to their brother in the tree and take him down with a gentle urgency. They embrace him in the same white hands that broke skin, healed the wounds of the father, the brother, the son, and carrying him lovingly on their shoulders to his family. This is my dream. You cannot change the past. It does not rewind. It exists in time as was, as is. But from the work that is being done in this very room, we can embody the truth of the power in my dream for our ancestors. I look into the crowd before me and I see them sitting with us, all in unison, lovingly, laughing, forgiving, listening. And to me, that is a beloved community.
Although we were going to study civil rights and in Alabama and attending a beloved community conference, that history is more about African American struggle from enslavement up until today of what's happening around lynching, mass incarceration. And although it looks like it has affected the African American community, what we need to understand that history is American history. We do all have to get along across age, intergenerationally, culturally, and we wanted to make sure that our group really represents Governor State University.
I don't think everyone's interests are the same.
I wanted to go on the Civil Rights Tour and Conference in Alabama because I'm currently in the process of completing my capstone project for my graduate degree, and part of my capstone project focuses on diversity and inclusion in a local school district.
Civil rights area is a really important part of history. It's something that I grew up learning about from my mother. I believe that my mom was just very compelled to make sure that I understood what was happening and what was going on. And this is something that just kind of carried on into my adolescent phase and so on.
My goal is to be a civil rights leader, and I believe in not repeating cycles of past behaviors as well. So I wanted to be a solution to the problem.
I don't think everyone's compassion is the same.
I have this idea of that there's a thing called slavery in America, and there's a racial separation. I wanted to know how the people in this country have fought against this and what are the events that happened in that particular time.
As a leader, I didn't know what to expect, really. I just knew that anything that Dr. West was involved in or was leading would be fantastic. And I wanted to be a part of that. So my expectations were that we would become closer and we would have the student group that would become closer. I just didn't know how it would play out.
I don't think everyone is impacted the same.
Being an immigrant, which I stated on the trip, my closest community is, the African American community coming from Nigeria, where a lot of this, the slavery happened. The origin of the slavery. Slavery is something we don't talk about a lot in Nigeria. Like, I don't want to sound wrong, but it's kind of something we moved away from. We moved on from.
I wanted to go to Alabama for the Civil Rights Becoming Beloved Community Tour because I really felt a sort of disconnect between my ancestors. I wanted to know more. I really wanted to get that experience about my community and my culture.
Why are we doing this? Why do we want this to happen? And why do we want to be a part of this group? And I think there was a theme that they really did care about humanity. And I call it humanity to include all of the challenges we see in our country, in our city, community, and world.
To be so close to the Clotilda slave ship was tough. Tour guide that took us, the one that we asked to come with us, Mr. Darron, just being around him and knowing that he is a direct descendant of someone who was brought here on the Clotilda, and he's working as hard as he can to get the ship retrieved and brought above water.
I literally felt the spirits of our ancestors, and I had to go to the very end of the boat by myself and just stay there.
It was sad because all I could think about was the pain of the people who were on that ship. And to see the descendant crying and telling us the history, it was very sad.
I listened to the tour guide as we were kind of going, but I really wanted to kind of take in the scene. They had talked about an island that they had let the slaves off on. And I was just kind of putting myself in that mindset, like coming all the way from my home, not knowing if I'm going to see my family again. Going through these just horrible, horrendous conditions to get there, and then to get there to be left off on some place. You don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, you don't know what's about to happen. So I felt all of that.
I remember I was really trying to search deeply, like, okay, what is it? What are you not getting? What are they getting that you're not getting? I remember that I stayed to myself a little bit, and people thought I was feeling something. I was trying to search. It was more like trying to search, like block out everyone else, and then trying to search. I was numb. I was numb. I didn't have any feelings in that particular moment.
One of the white men on the boat, he just kept saying that, you know, all people were enslaved. Black people weren't the only people enslaved.
Slavery is not just a black thing. It is red, yellow, black, and white.
When he first said it, because he said it a couple times, I kind of like brushed it off like, okay. Then he said it again, and I was like, am I the only one hearing this?
And all races have been enslaved or
how can I say this? That they can just treat us any type of way. Like they can just say, however, whenever, especially when they feel like they have authority over us. And in that moment, he had some type of authority over us because he was controlling the boat. But I feel like I was mainly disrespected in that moment.
I really wondered if everyone on the trip, people of other races, really got it. And it's not because they probably meant to be insincere, but that they just couldn't identify. They didn't have a frame of reference.
Phyllis, students, they were emotional, but not shocked. I was shocked and emotional. That evening was, it was really hard. I said we needed to see that, you know, see just how persisting this ugliness was. And I learned very quickly, as Dr. West said, and she said, no, we didn't need to see that. You might have needed to see that.
Yet it was an opportunity to reframe it because we were in the middle of the ocean. And how we conduct ourselves could have put us in harm's way or harmed the people who were from Alabama. So we did it the way our ancestors would have done it.
It's unfortunate that it happened, but it did. And but we are well within 5,000 feet. Yes. The question was, will I point in the direction of the ship? That way.
And we poured libation and we stayed focused with the prayer and libation on what was important. And that was for us to pay respect to our ancestors. And we did that. We pour libation for the names that we can't call. Those are our ancestors. Never leave us.
I don't know what my ancestors did. I don't know their history very well. I know some of my family is a little racist, and they do often exhibit discrimination, so.
My experience at the Legacy Museum was traumatic. It was bittersweet. I gained a ton of knowledge, but I'll never go back there again.
Like, as soon as you walk in, you see oceans and waves on TV monitor, and it kind of tells you like a few words about like a little bit of the history.
It felt like you had just been taken.
The statues, before even going in, the statues.
We see heads, like molds, I would say molds of people that look just like me and you, like my brothers, my sisters.
I saw some of the students I was with. I saw Dr. West in some of the faces that I saw.
There's one point in the museum towards the beginning where you're looking in these dungeon cells And you have to get close enough to see, close enough where, again, you're feeling it. You feel like you're in it.
One of them inside of one that I stepped in front of, it was these two little children. It was a boy and a girl. I'm sorry.
And they was like asking like, where's my mother?
This is like not even halfway through the museum. There was one particular part of us in the museum where there is this large wall of jars.
So they had them on one side, and then if you stepped behind it, you could see them on the other side. The person who works in the museum stepped over and said, oh, it's 800 jars. And I was like, wow.
Each jar represents a person who was lynched and did not get a proper burial. At that moment, it became real for me.
The processing, what happened, and the expectation of not fully understanding how long this is going to take to process. And the only concern that we have now is to make sure we give each person time to step back and reflect.
I really love the reflections. And so, and for those that don't know, it was basically like after every night of, seeing the museums and seeing the monuments and things like that, we had to be open. We had to be true to ourselves. We had to expose ourselves in a way. And that's something that is scary because, these are people that you technically only known for two days,
On the first day after went to go see the Clotilda, I really didn't have a lot to say. Didn't really want to open up, but on the second day, I felt a little bit more opened up.
It wasn't as forced as I thought it was going to be. Everybody on the trip had good intentions, and we were also led by people with good intentions who made a lot of space. On the last day of the trip, during the conference, where there was a panel of people talking around a lot of the subjects we had been exposed to, towards the end of the ceremony, I asked Dr. Harrell if I could say a few words.
When she first came on this trip, she was kind of shy. Like she wasn't talking to a lot of people. And then on the last day, she kind of got up in front of the room and said,
How I process trauma and pain is always through art. I described a visual I felt like would close the ceremony well, but also get like an overall idea off my chest that I felt like was important.
I just like to see when people use their gift. So that was a really great moment too.
It inspired me a little bit. See how like she went from shyness to being able to get up in a room. It made me want to also talk more and get to know more people.
We had just an array of people, and I think that was really good because we all played off of each other, and it was just a really good group, and there was camaraderie throughout.
It just showed the passion that everybody had to learn more about what have happened.
I think that this was a perfect knit group. We didn't spend a lot of time bonding before the trip, so that was something different, and I thought that was going to be something that affected the trip, but it actually didn't.
By the end of the trip, I was like, okay, I'm one of them. Like, we are having fun. We can speak whatever we like. I can personally say that I am a little bit more Americanized now than when I started.
The more people who are able to have these experiences together, you're building a larger, beloved community. A community of people who can support each other in doing very powerful work. Any evil intention to harm African people, you can't succeed at it because we're still here. And the ancestors will remind us each and every time we're still here.
Is the time correct? Yes. So it is 6:40, 6:37? It's 7 o'clock. Okay. All right. So with that said, if you would, let's be quiet for a moment. And think about what you've witnessed. Think about who you are at this moment. And think about who you want to be within the context of becoming the beloved community. Who do you want to, if I recall correctly, Professor of English, Dr. Gibson, the etymology of becoming is come to be. Who do you want to come to be at this time? 55 years on the date that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. So if you would, think about that for a moment and let us come back together at 7:08. Is that possible? Dialogue. Think about it. We'll see you at 7:08 back in this space. My beloved community, it is time to come back and focus. So within the context of the fact that we continue to live in the pandemic, which is a part of our experience, continues to be a contextual part of our experience of life these days. So with that said, we have two changes this evening. One, unfortunately, due to airplane changes, Walter Hood would not be with us in person, but he's joining us momentarily via Zoom live. Second, as a journalist and for my colleagues in the School of Journalism and Media Studies, assignments happen. And with that said, Eric Deggans has an assignment for National Public Radio. He cannot be with us in person tonight, but Eric Deggans recorded for us specifically tonight. And before I continue, let's talk about why, let's just think for a moment, why is it necessary to take a critical look at the intersectionality of the contextual experience, the lived experience of the children who were on the Clotilda, media stereotypes which been addressed, as well as this intersectionality of media and government and how that continues to perpetuate racism. And then we know that we live in a society where in truth, what is truth? Truth is being questioned. In addition to, because we are particularly in the South, we know that due to as Darron reminded us, even though the Civil War ended, we're still fighting the Civil War, so to speak, within the context of how we perceive and how we project monuments and landscapes. And so this is our conversation for the rest of the evening. And so at this time, I'm going to introduce via a recording, and Eric Deggans, media critic for National Public Radio, promises he will come to Auburn University live and in person. So for the first next 8 minutes or so, let's listen to Eric Deggans.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Deggans, and I'm TV critic and media analyst for National Public Radio. Originally, I was supposed to be there with you in person, but NPR asked me to cover an event in New York City on the same night that you're doing your presentation. So I'm not able to be there, unfortunately, and I'm really sorry for that. But the folks at Auburn have been great about allowing me to pre-tape some remarks that hopefully will offer some ideas that will help get your discussion started and give you a sense of what I would have said if I actually was able to be there in person. So, I don't do anything in presentations without using PowerPoint. So let's get my PowerPoint going here first. And I'm gonna widen my pane a little bit here. It may cover some of these PowerPoints, but I want you guys to be able to see me. So this is a great idea, talking about the beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. wanted to create and urged us to create. I want to talk, first of all, about something that I just have to admit right out the gate. I have a great job, okay? I get paid to watch TV and talk to cool people. I don't think you heard me. I get paid to watch television and talk to cool people. Everybody from David Letterman to Oprah Winfrey to Diddy, and I even got to guest host a show on CNN once or twice. But my real job is being a watchdog on how TV and media affects us all. And I do stories for NPR about it. I go on shows like Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, and I also go on local television and talk about how the COVID lockdowns affected television. And there's no more potent area where all of this comes together than when we look at race and we look at social issues. So I wrote this book called Race Baiter that came out in 2012. It was both a media literacy book. It told you how media literacy works, and it was a race literacy book. It told you about how race worked in America and how those two things come together to create so many dynamics that we take for granted in American society. One of the things that struck me when the folks from Auburn asked me to speak is that we don't just commemorate something like the 55th anniversary of MLK's assassination to remember a bitter history. Of course, it's an important moment, but we also remember these things because we want to recognize the conditions that we're living through today that are directly descended from those past events. And we'll talk about some of that stuff later in this presentation. I love the MLK quote that says that the arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. And I do believe that, but I also think American history shows that our story is about progress and backlash again and again and again. When the Civil War ends, Black people get the right to vote. Reconstruction remakes the Southern states. That's followed by the redemption. Southern states taking those voting rights away from Black people again, instituting Jim Crow segregation laws, and oppressing Black people in a way that would take decades for them to recover from. When Martin Luther King Jr. and his allies in the classic civil rights movement had so many victories in the mid-1960s, from the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, a Supreme Court decision that outlawed laws against interracial marriage. The response to that was disaffected Southern Democrats joining the Republican Party and backing Richard Nixon to be elected president. And then we come to the death of George Floyd. You see how he was murdered by police over 8 minutes. And the obviousness of the deadliness of systemic racism and policing and criminal justice is right there. And obviously, we had a whole summer where there was a reckoning over these issues and people responded to it. Well, what was the reaction to that? These bad faith debates about critical race theory in high school and elementary school, which wasn't happening, demonizing phrases like cancel culture and woke, and the attempts to attack the very idea of systemic racism and prejudice in American society. I think there's 4 types of racism that often distort media and get in the way of reaching that beloved community that we talked about. And I want to talk about those real quickly. First, I want to talk about something I call bigotry denial syndrome, and I think is exemplified by Megyn Kelly, who was an anchor at Fox News and at NBC News. Bigotry denial syndrome is walking around and saying, I'm not personally a bigot. I don't think my race is better than anyone else's. Therefore, I can't perpetuate stereotypes or perpetuate systemic racism or prejudice. Now, most people who study these things know that that's not true.
What is racist? Because truly, you do get in trouble if you are a white person who puts on blackface for Halloween, or a Black person who puts on whiteface for Halloween. Like back when I was a kid, that was okay as long as you were dressing up as like a character. There was a controversy on The Real Housewives of New York with Luann, as she dressed as Diana Ross. And she made her skin look darker than it really is. And people said that that was racist. And I don't know, I thought, like, who doesn't love Diana Ross? She wants to look like Diana Ross for one day. I don't know how, like, that got racist on Halloween.
So one of the things that was interesting to me about this is that the other people on the panel tried to warn her, no, blackface is not cool. But she went ahead. Once again, an all-white panel talking about a racial issue, but also betraying Megyn Kelly's ignorance about the roots of blackface. Now, if we were in the same place, I would ask you, why is blackface so terrible? Besides the fact that it's just personally kind of offensive, for particularly for people of color to be around. Blackface is terrible because it's a historic instrument of oppression that has been used to disenfranchise Black people. Blackface was used by white performers in the early 1900s to portray Black people in minstrel shows, in stage shows, in films like Birth of a Nation. And they always portrayed Black people as lazy and stupid, childlike, sexually aggressive, violent, and making the case basically to white America that Black people were not worthy of the rights that they've been given in the wake of the Civil War. And it helped justify pulling back the voting rights and instituting Jim Crow segregation and oppressing Black people again. So blackface isn't just offensive, it's a historic instrument of oppression that's been used against Black people. And Megyn Kelly wasn't aware of this because she was so steeped in this bigotry denial syndrome that it couldn't occur to her that she might feel so strongly about something that would also perpetuate stereotypes, but it did. Bigotry denial syndrome is one kind of thing. Situational racism is another. And this is summed up by a scene from one of my favorite movies called Do the Right Thing. Spike Lee's the director of that movie. He also plays a character. He plays a delivery guy who delivers pizzas for an Italian-American family-owned pizzeria that's in a Black and brown neighborhood. At one point, Spike Lee decides to pull aside John Turturro's character. He's the oldest son who's running this restaurant, and ask him, like, why do you use the N-word so much against Black people that you encounter in life when you seem to like so many Black people? Here's the conversation.
Can I talk to you for a second? What? Pino, who's your favorite basketball player? Magic Johnson. Who's your favorite movie star? Eddie Murphy. Who's your favorite rock star? Prince. You're a Prince fan. Oh, it's Bruce. Prince. Bruce. Pino, all you ever talk about is nigga this and nigga that. And all your favorite people are so-called niggas. It's different. Magic, Eddie, Prince are not niggas. I mean, they're not Black. I mean, let me explain myself. They're not really Black. I mean, they're Black, but they're not really Black. They're more than Black. It's different. It's different? Yeah, to me, it's different. You know, deep down inside, I think you wish you were Black. Get the fuck out of here. Laugh if you want to. You know, your hair is kinkier than mine.
I love that scene, and I particularly love the way Spike is looking at him while he's trying to explain himself. But situational racism is this idea of leveraging prejudice and stereotypes against selected people of color, often those you dislike, or elevating certain people of color out of stereotypes that you have for everyone else who is in that group. And that's what Pino, John Turturro's character, is doing. He has all these stereotypes about most Black people that he encounters. But if a Black person distinguishes themselves to him, if they are an amazing athlete or a wonderful comic or a great actor or a wonderful performer, then all of a sudden he elevates them out of that group. And to him, it's like they're not even Black. But this is a type of racism, and it's a type of racism that's often practiced by people who think that they are not bigots because there are certain Black people that either they like, or there are a lot of Black people that they like. Strategic racism is using racism to achieve a material goal. We see politicians do this, of course, in the way that undocumented immigrants are demonized, or in the way in which some people talked about Barack Obama in a way that had coded racial messages inside of it. A big example of strategic racism is something called convict leasing. Now, this happened in the wake of the Civil War as well. Civil War ends, slavery ends, but there's all these businesses that need the labor of slaves in order to prosper. But there's a loophole for the end of slavery. If you're convicted of a crime, you can be forced to work off that sentence in hard labor. So all of a sudden, being Black in certain spaces became criminalized. You had these communities that were called sundown towns, where Black people were within the city limits after sundown, they could be arrested, charged with loitering, be forced to work off that sentence at hard labor. And, farms and mines and plantations would then pay the state for a certain number of convicts to come to their business and work for them. And this was something that happened well into the 1920s. This book, Slavery by Another Name, has a lot of great information on that. But what it also did was it criminalized being Black in a way that we're still struggling with now. It taught law enforcement to focus on Black people and try to find ways to trip them up and throw them into jail so that they could then become part of this system where they were used as free and cheap labor. So we have bigotry denial syndrome, we have strategic racism, we have situational racism, and then finally, we have white privilege. benefits extended in society to white people that are often taken for granted or unspoken. One of them is being the generic. Whenever you think of the average mom or the average laborer or the average businessman, you think of a white person, and there's a lot of power in that. Also, being the objective standard of beauty. Who decided that blonde hair and blue eyes and fair skin were signs of beauty? You know, those are attributes that are normally found in white people. In fact, I decided as an experiment to Google the phrase attractive women and then call up Google image search and see what came up. This is what happened. If you look at all of these photos, there's one woman, maybe two women who are considered non-white women. Even Google image search thinks that attractive women are mostly white. And then, of course, you have being a symbol only of yourself, not your race, and being presumed innocent. You're not presumed to be a criminal affirmative action beneficiary or a troublemaker unless you earn that distinction. Some of the elements of white privilege. Now, if we were in the same space, I would show you a local TV news story that had all four things in it: bigotry, denial syndrome, strategic racism, situational racism, and white privilege. Instead, I'll show you a question that I would also ask you if I was in the same space, which is, what's one of the greatest achievements of the classic civil rights movement that was championed by Martin Luther King Jr. and his allies? When I ask this in presentations, sometimes it takes people a while to kind of warm up and give me answers, but eventually they say, you know, the end of segregation in schools, or the end of segregation in housing, or voting rights, or a Supreme Court decision that struck down laws against interracial marriage. And those are all good answers. But for me, it is making open racism socially unacceptable. Now, some may quibble with that, but the way I know it's true is that even white supremacists don't want to be called racist. This is a billboard that was put up to promote a podcast that the people who make it admit is a white supremacist podcast, but they insist they're not racist. I don't get it either. What I think it does show, though, is the power and the way in which that word has been successfully demonized and cast out from polite society. Even people who embody that word don't necessarily want to be called it. We've seen people say that race is a social construct, and I think it's people's way of saying that physically we are mostly the same, whether we're Black or white or Asian, and that's wonderful. But, you know, money is a social construct too, and it's a pretty powerful force in our lives. And what we are now is we're inside an American system that started hundreds of years ago when settlers came to this country, and they were religious and they were dedicated to not enslaving other people. So they had all these industries, though, that needed the free and cheap labor of slavery in order to flourish. So they found a country with people who didn't look like them, who had technology that wasn't like theirs, and they called them not people, and they brought them here. And now we have to deal with centuries of laws and stereotypes and myths and justifications that have been used to oppress and marginalize people of color in order to reach that beloved community that Martin Luther King Jr. talked about so much. Now, normally, if I was with you in person, I would ask you if you had any questions. Unfortunately, I'm not there to take them, but I hope this presentation has given you some ideas and will fuel the conversation that you're going to have later tonight. I want to thank once again the folks at Auburn for allowing me to give this presentation. I hope you guys have a great conversation, and I also hope I get a chance to spend some time with you in person in the future. Thanks a lot.
Continue the conversation. Okay. We're going to continue the conversation with a person in person, and we are honored tonight to have an alumna of Auburn University, as well as I'm so sorry, I should say the Pulitzer Prize winning alumna of Auburn University. Cynthia Tucker is going to continue our conversation, and her most recent book is The Southernization of America, a story of democracy in the balance. So please welcome her as we walk over to continue the conversation.
You want me to just talk? Yes. All right. Let me first say War Eagle, everybody. War Eagle. That presentation Eric just gave was wonderful. And there was a word he used that I want to focus on. He used the word backlash, and I want to talk about that some. And I want to talk about what I think that backlash really was about. So on election day, November, whatever it was, 2016, I had been invited to give a talk at the Candler School of Theology at Emory. And I had written this lecture all about how President Hillary Clinton would have to deal with the racism that I could already see on the rise because Donald Trump's campaign had brought it to the surface. I was up into the wee hours the night before rewriting that talk. And I opened it by saying, I woke up this morning in a country I don't recognize. And I talked about the fact that I believe the United States was once again in a post-Reconstruction era. I spent much of the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency particularly frustrated by other political commentators because I believed that they were ignoring the racial animus which had fueled so much of Donald Trump's support. They were enamored of this notion of a post-racial America. And in my view, they just refused to see it. I would say that now, not only do political scientists see it, but even many white political commentators see it. I also want to say, before I go any further, that I am not saying that I believed anybody who voted for Donald Trump was racist. I certainly believe that there were people conservatives who supported him because they wanted a conservative Supreme Court. There were those who voted for him because they believed he would make a better economy. But political scientists have now done enough research that there are reams of research documents that show that the most powerful force motivating Donald Trump supporters was racial animus. In 2009, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution sent me to Washington, D.C. to write political commentary about the Obama presidency. And by the time I arrived, a lot of the optimism that Black Americans particularly had enjoyed when Obama was first elected had already begun to dissipate. For one thing, the birthers had already crawled out from under their rock. You remember the birthers. They were the people who insisted that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Never mind the fact that he produced his long-form birth certificate. Never mind the fact that there were birth announcements in Hawaiian newspapers celebrating the announcement of his birth. The facts did not matter. For many whites, declaring him foreign-born obviously was a way of declaring him illegitimate as a president. And that was a more acceptable way of saying he was illegitimate than saying a Black man should not be running the country. And one of the things that I was taken aback by was how widespread this notion was. When I started teaching at the University of Georgia in 2012, my dean, who was a white Obama supporter, said he knew many well-educated, affluent white people who insisted that Obama was not born in the United States. But the birthers were not my only clue that racial animus was beneath this backlash to the nation's first Black president. You might remember the Tea Party. The Tea Party rose suddenly in 2009, the same year of Obama's, the first year of his presidency. Now, they claimed that they were all about lower taxes, less government spending, and a lower national debt. But I covered some of their rallies in Washington, D.C. And I can tell you about the signs and placards I saw. Not just the Confederate flags that were waving, but I remember signs that had Obama's face on the body of a so-called African witch doctor. I remember a sign that said, "Monkey see, monkey spend." There were very few placards about lower taxes. Whatever else may be said about Donald Trump, he's cunning, he's savvy, and he understood how he could use that growing racial animus, that backlash to the nation's first Black president. And so how did he announce himself on the political stage? Birther in chief. And when he descended the golden elevator in the Trump Tower to announce his campaign for the presidency, he did it by denouncing in vile terms Mexicans and Muslims. The more important thing, though, that I think about that period, that backlash, is what I believe it was really in response to. Yes, of course it was about Obama, but Obama was a symbol. Obama was a symbol of demographic change. Remember how he got elected. Obama was elected by what Jesse Jackson likes to call the Rainbow Coalition. Yes, he had substantial white support. He couldn't have won the presidency without it. But he did not win in 2008 or 2012 a majority of white voters. He got substantial white support, and then he got overwhelming support from every group of color in the US. Black Americans, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, Latinos supported Obama overwhelmingly. Now, demographers had been talking about the browning of America for decades. In 1990, Time magazine published a cover on the transforming population emblazoned with a multicolored flag and the headline, "America's Changing Colors. What will the US be like when whites are no longer the majority?" But average Americans didn't give that much thought, in my view. until Obama was elected. That's when alarm bells went off. Now, many on the right, in what passes for its intellectual class, had been talking about this and writing about this for decades. Pat Buchanan wrote a book called The Suicide of a Superpower. The way the United States, in his view, was committing suicide was by letting in so many immigrants of color who were going to ruin the country. This is what Time magazine's writers wrote in 1990 about a Browning America, about a time when whites would no longer be a statistical majority, no longer 50% plus one. And this is a direct quote from Time. It seems all too predictable that during the next decades, many more mainstream white Americans will begin to speak openly about the nation they feel they are losing. There are not, after all, many non-white faces depicted in Norman Rockwell's paintings. White Americans are accustomed to thinking of themselves as the very picture of their nation. Eric talked about this. White privilege, being generic, being the average American. And again, that's from Time magazine. They were prescient enough to see that coming. And by 2015, we had a man running for the presidency talking about making America great again, which some clever wags clearly saw as make America white again. He ran and he won. The good news is he was defeated in 2020. The bad news is Donald Trump got more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. I find that pretty astounding and pretty depressing, quite frankly. But the simple fact of the matter is, by now, the Browning of America is already baked in. It doesn't matter what the House of Kevin McCarthy's House of Representatives does. It doesn't matter who's elected president. It doesn't matter if Trump could somehow miraculously get Mexico to pay for a border wall. By 2040, whites will no longer represent a statistical majority, no longer represent 50% plus one. They will still be the largest racial or ethnic group, a plurality, if you will, but no longer a majority. What does that mean? Well, that's an excellent question. And it goes back to our being here, creating a beloved community. In many ways, for all of its problems, and Eric would be so much better about talking about Hollywood than I, because that's his area of expertise. Nevertheless, Hollywood is already showing us some of what this will be like. Pay attention to commercials. How many commercials do you see with, an average Black family in it? With the Black father telling the teenage son about driving, safe driving? Or how many commercials do you see that have interracial couples? And they're cute little kinky-haired biracial children. Every time I see one of those, I think to myself, that's what the Trumpers are really pissed off about. But that is where we are. And we don't have any choice but to learn to live together with the country we have. When my colleague and friend Fry Gilliard and I wrote a book called The Southernization of America, we very deliberately chose the subtitle, A Story of Democracy in the Balance, because we believe that democracy still teeters in the balance. There are people who are so upset about the prospect of whites losing their special status in the country that they'd rather not have democracy. Toward the end of her brilliant book, Caste, Isabel Wilkerson talks about a conversation she had with a friend where she's talking about demographic change. And she's wondering about, and the friend is actually Taylor Branch, the brilliant writer. And she's talking about demographic change, and she's saying, I wonder how our democracy is going to handle this. And he says something like, so what you're really asking is, will white Americans choose democracy, or will they choose whiteness? And I think that is where we are at the moment, with that choice in front of us. Do we choose to become the beloved community? Which I don't see as a frightening prospect. As I look back over my lifetime, just the changes since the civil rights movement, I don't see that anybody has been harmed by it. It is a more prosperous country overall than it was when I was growing up. Certainly the South is more prosperous than it was when I was growing up. But there are people who are so frightened by the prospect that they would rather end this great experiment. So I think the question before us is, which way do we go? Do we succumb to our fears, or do we work very hard to become for the first time, a genuine pluralistic democracy with equal rights for everyone?
Thank you. So in this interactive moment, Cynthia and I are going to step away, and Walter is going to come forth live from Oakland, California. Is that correct? Yes.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can they hear me now? Yeah. Okay, sorry y'all, I was muted and my mouth was just moving, I'm assuming. So again, to start out, I'd like to speak to you about this idea of tripartite dualities. And as I was speaking, I won't reiterate, but I started thinking about the landscapes in which we live in this country after Mike Brown was killed in the middle of the street in his neighborhood. And again, this neighborhood was described as a place that I knew very well. And so the following fall at UC Berkeley, I invited about a half dozen of my friends, colleagues, designers to come to Berkeley and to speak about the landscape. And who knew that within 6 to 7 years, we would be going through this reckoning. So Black Landscapes Matter came out a few years later, but it was not written after George Floyd, but the years that preceded that. To start out, I'd like to just talk about this post-colonial landscape that Eric and Cynthia talked a little bit about, but there is no hyphen in post-colonial the way we see it in this country. Post-colonial or Reconstruction, when you think after the colonial days, I think we're still living in this post-colonial landscape. This diagram shows you the lineage of the last 100 years, few hundred years, and I start out in 1730 on the left in Middleton Place, which is a plantation outside of Charleston. When I was getting a degree in landscape architecture, that was one of the first gardens that I learned about. And it was described as a colonial garden. It was influenced by the French, but not one mention of slavery or plantation. And as you make your way forward, we can see Mount Vernon in 1759. This is the home of George Washington. We have the home of Thomas Jefferson. We have all of these canonized places that begin to talk about how to build a landscape here in this country. And in 1850s up to 1860s, we get Central Park in New York. Now I'm showing this because during this time that I'm talking about these great inventions, many groups of people are excluded, including Africans, including Chinese, and most important, including the natives that were here. And as we go through the 20th century, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, we begin to partition the landscape. And in time, we duplicate the landscape. And we actually have two different landscapes, one for brown and Black people and one for white. And then at the end of the 60s into the 70s, the idea of integration comes along, but it's unfortunate to say I can't find any design ideas that talk about integrating and being together. I can find many designs that talk about partitioning, duplication, and exclusion. I'd like to go through some of these three ideas that I posited. The first one is this idea of a double logic. In any colonial landscape, there has to be a new way, a new framing of the landscape for those new inhabitants. And this is through isolation and exclusion. I'm using the 1757 map here from Charleston, South Carolina. It's featured in Black Shoals by Tiffany King that talked about these early colonial days, how through the mapping and cartography, we actually begin to see how an American landscape is actually being manifest. The exclusion to the inland areas, you here see nothing on the natives that were here, and the Atlantic Ocean is just this vast, vast figure ground. And here you see the cartographer trying to shape a land through these new inhabitants. And Derrida talks about this idea of le brochure, this kind of breaking at the same place. And in all the early images you see of the US, there's nothing else but those colonial cultures and their formal ideas being laid out. Everything else is excluded, which gives us the logic that we see today. This idea of doubling, it gets so insensitive to a certain degree that even the natural systems actually become doubled. In our national parks, we actually have places for colored people in national parks. Even in these great 1,000 acres of land, it's being partitioned out and only certain people can experience it. You can imagine what that might feel to someone young or someone old, that the trees, the actual biomass around you has been racialized. And then this idea of moving forward, how we begin to kind of see the redlining map of the 20s and 30s. And this is where Arable talks about this idea of underdevelopment. And we can read the redline map of places where you don't want to develop. And the people who are there, they're left in an undeveloped state. So instead of looking at redline maps or as like exclusive covenants, we have to think of them as places where there's no investment. and more importantly, investment in people. People will have to go to other landscapes to be developed. And then the double semiotic. You know, you wonder, how do we know when a neighborhood is poor and we know where Black people live? How do we know where certain groups live? We're accustomed to these signs and symbols. Here you see on one side, vacant property, overgrown, unkept. And then on the right, you see a highly spruced place. But this idea of the double semiotic starts very early in colonial times. If you look at Mobile, Alabama, New Orleans, you go to Detroit, you go to New Amsterdam, which I'm showing you here, they were all walled cities. And the wall became the first thing that isolated and separated. I show Wall Street here because Wall Street, the wall here was actually built by the Africans to protect the Dutch from the natives who were there. And today we still have Wall Street. But we can go around from Detroit at the Burwood Wall at 8 Mile, and you can see during the covenants, even from the federal housing program, that when you built a new housing program next to people of color, they paid for walls to be built to keep the value of those places, which goes back to the red line maps. Or infrastructure. We talked a little bit about infrastructure, you know, in these places where you basically have no relationships or no change in relationships from those spaces around you. The infrastructure, sewage treatment plants, I guarantee in every city you go to, find the sewage treatment plant and you'll find the brown and Black people. And when we have like storm surges and when water rises, it's not from the things that's happening overland, it's because the infrastructure is in these low-lying areas where people are very vulnerable. Or topography. You know, the Black bottoms of the world. There's a Black bottom in Detroit. There's a Black bottom in Charlotte, North Carolina. There's a Black bottom in Oakland, California. And again, these are those low-lying areas. And here you see in Detroit in 1949, this is where a lot of the Southern migrants actually came up to Detroit to live in Black Bottom. And then years later, it completely gets redeveloped with the freeway. And Mies van der Rohe creates this really wonderful new design while Blacks are pushed to the other side of town. And again, the lowlands are valued again. The Detroit River is valued again. During the undervalued, those are places where you find us. And then lastly, the visuals of, you know, the semiotic is we love to put murals in our neighborhoods, the street signs, ornaments and objects, biomass, their unkeptness. But these are all part of us learning to live a certain way, and we accept it. And so we argue for murals in our neighborhood versus, again, developing them in more powerful ways. And then lastly of the three is the double consciousness. And I use Baldwin here from his early semi-autobiographical Clotilda on the Mountains, you know, where his father gives him, you know, change on his birthday. His mother gives him change on the birthday to go down to Fifth Avenue to actually spend it for his birthday. And he goes to his favorite hill. And his hill is in Central Park. And here in Central Park, he is free. He is free to be this individual. He's looking out at the city and he screams out, Hosanna, right? But this is this idea that the landscape behind him actually is freeing him up because those semiotics don't exist. And as he makes his way down the hill, he bumps into an older white man and he immediately goes to apologize and the man winks at him. He makes his way to Fifth Avenue and he returns back to the consciousness of they hate me. And when we think about the park, it's an American invention. And I would go back when I did the map. In the late 19th century, Frederick Law Olmsted, he wrote a lot about mixing. And he used the park as an invention to mix. But we know that didn't last long because as immigrants came in, people were basically looked at as different. And through that, whites did not want to even mix with other poor whites. And so the park then became a different vehicle. We no longer have the great parks of the 19th century. We then get parks that conform to recreation, parks that are more political, but parks that don't have at their root this idea of the gregarious recreation, this place in which we can mix and people can find themselves alone or find themselves together. But some of the work we've tried to do in the studio here at Hood Design has tried to change some of these logics. This is the Hill District, 1,000 acres in Pittsburgh. And we try to get people to see this new logic, which is a high in biomass, a sustainable city. But again, we could not convince the Parks Department. or the double semiotic in 7th Street in Oakland, using the freeway infrastructure to actually begin to talk about something different, to talk about our heroes that we normally see on our kitchen walls, but to actually see them in the street. And then lastly, the double consciousness, being able to use, as I think Cynthia talked about it, this kind of power that we've gained by having to have that duality, but to actually begin to have whites take that on. And this is a piece that we did for Princeton, getting people to actually look at the School of Public Policy and through the president here and his, how can I say, his detractors of the day, to basically think that if others had a consciousness, how would they actually talk about themselves and how would they talk about the institutions? And that brings me to the final piece here, which is our installation that's coming up in the fall at the Julie Collins Smith Museum. It's going to be entitled Arc of Life, Arc of Bones. And the idea is taken by, coming to Alabama and being, again, blown away by the experiences that we see at all of the institutions, and the people and the landscape itself. And I was taken by this map that was put out by Tuskegee that looked at the early lynchings in Alabama. And here the skulls actually become the dots of the numbers of the lynching. And from this, we were very attracted to George Biddle's work, who George was part of the WPA movement in the 30s of bringing artists together to really talk about the lynchings in the area. And so from that, I'm recalling the short story by Henry Dumas that talks about the Arc of Bones. It was written in 1974, but it was this idea where he's describing two boys on the banks of the Mississippi and they see a boat out in the distance and they want to know what it is. And they go out to the boat and there's a shaman. He's dressed in hides and he says, "This is the boat of your ancestors. Son, you're in the house of generations. Every African who lives in America has a part of his soul in this ark." And so we're inspired by coming to the Alabama River and actually making an ark, baptizing it, and bringing it back to the museum. Along with that, there will be 10 biographical paintings from my early childhood up until 1972 that begin to talk about my arc of life as it relates, right, to this other thing that's going on in the Alabama landscape. We see the site for baptismal as a ritual here at the Riverfront Park mooring. This little eddy to the north is right across from the Equal Justice Center. We would like to baptize it here and then take it all the way to Auburn and then install it on the grounds of the museum. The ark is a very simple idea. It's 45 feet long. It's about 10 to 12 feet wide. We're basically taking a barge and placing a shotgun house inside it. And the shotgun house becomes the house of the ancestors. We moor it, we baptize it. People come, they experience it. We collect the mud from the bottom of the river to create ballast and sandbags that will hold it down. And as we were speaking today, we're now looking at water vessels that we will scan. And once it makes its way back to the museum, we will turn it upside down. And when we turn it upside down, it will become the house. All of a sudden now, the actual barge becomes the roof. The shotgun house gets interned, and inside will become the figurines of water vessels along with the sandbags. And for us, this idea of place and being able to talk about, again, this instrument, the shotgun house, this invention of our ancestors, but being able to use it in the landscape so that people begin to see the landscape in a different way. And maybe these conversations that we're beginning to have today, they actually take place in the House of Generations. Thank you. Did I lose everyone? I can't hear.
Walter, yes. Why the? We can't hear him. We can't hear you. Why the Ark of Bones?
Do we have any lip readers? Can you
So
hear me?
why they?
Can you hear me?
Cynthia's presentation was chilling to me because I'm always trying to think about how do we put people in place that douse the flames instead of fanning them? And I'm just trying to figure out, what do we do now? Walter's presentation was reality. I'm very familiar with Black Bottom in Detroit. I lived in Detroit for 20 years, and people would be shocked at the racism that places like Detroit have that you don't think is there. But to listen to Cynthia, it was chilling and stark and real. And I'm just wondering, what do we do? How do we stop putting kooks like Marjorie Taylor Greene in place? How do we stop putting people in place that mean this country no good? Do you want whiteness or do you want democracy? Wow. So my question, what do we do? How do we educate America? How do we get America to think?
Well, you know, I have I was educated in the South in public schools, and my son was too, but much later. He's 27 now. And he always says something to me when we have these conversations. He says, you know, that racism stuff, that's your generation and you know, grandma's generation, you know, all born in Alabama. He says, that's not my generation. And, you know, for us, that's just not where it is. And you know, you were talking about seeing the multiracial couples on TV and everything. And if you look at entertainment, what his generation has grown up with, you see a lot more faces of color, and that's becoming the normalized thing. There are Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Donald Trumps who are clinging to these old ways, but I've become much more optimistic seeing the younger generation coming. Correct. And I think we're seeing the last vestiges, and so not last, but you know, these people are clinging to that past. But I don't think, you know, as the white majority declines, I think we're going to see, and there'll be a lot of backlash, using your word.
I agree with that.
But, you know, look at pop culture. You see so many people of color in every forum, whether it's TV news or movies or music. It's not the world I grew up in.
So the stark reality is that what we were talking about before. It's our grandkids who are going to change this thing. You know, they're going to be the ones to change it. We won't see it.
And it's incremental, but I feel like we're bending toward justice. It's a long curve, a long arc, but I mean, I agree. This, you know, are we going to have democracy or white people? That's what's playing out. But I think democracy is going to win.
Yeah. Do you believe democracy is going to win? You know, it depends on the day you ask me. But I will agree that the younger folk give me a lot of hope. I teach part-time at the University of South Alabama, and my students are, in terms of cultural acceptance, very different from their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation. I was also hardened by the fact that in the midterms, the vote of 18 to 30-year-olds went overwhelmingly to Democrats. The problem, of course, is getting them to turn out to the polls at all. I did have a student, because I often end up in a class conversation saying to my students, this will be for you to solve. And the other day, one of them said to me, you say that to us a lot. Why are you leaving that? Y'all have messed everything up and now you're leaving this big burden with us, which I thought was interesting. He had a good point.
So, becoming the beloved community, how does that still apply as a possibility particularly on this day?
We've just got to, from where I sit, from what I see, we just got to keep plugging. We just got to keep doing what we do. We've got to keep speaking out against things that are wrong. We've got to keep making sure that when we recognize a point, something that someone has done is wrong, and maybe this sounds idealistic, I don't know, but it's all I got. It's all I got. We got to keep doing what we do. We cannot give in. We cannot give in to the elements. And you're right, the vestiges of the MTGs and that other guy, 45, they're holding on by their fingernails. So in that regard, there's hope.
And then Cynthia, you get the last word.
One of the things I was really struck by doing the Clotilda book, I went to Benin in Africa, and I saw they were having the same generational hurts that we're having here in America. They're dealing with questions of reparations for the members of the tribes that were sold. They're dealing with, the president, the current president of Benin in the last election cycle was attacked because not physically, but by his people who were running against him, because his ancestors had been slave dealers. And he was actually a millionaire from cotton. And it's very analogous to what's here. So seeing those same issues there without the lens of race, but with, class and these other dividing mechanisms. It's kind of what we have to do as people, is overcome our baser instincts all the time. And then there are people like, Donald Trump who appeal to those, and there are a lot of people who embrace that. But that's the story of America. That's the story of Alabama. Go back to Birmingham, in the 60s. I just feel like our trajectory is to the light. And we just have to keep working and not be discouraged by the people pulling us back toward the dark.
Well, I am encouraged just by events like this one and by the group that was together from Governor's College. Clearly, it's a small group of people, young folk mostly, but they learned so much. And Darron talked about not leaving this room the same way we came in. They were changed by that experience. So I think certainly part of the answer is more of that kind of exposure, because even if none of them become elected officials or leaders of big movements, they will nevertheless be leaders. And I think that matters a lot.
It does matter. And I know that I'm being given the motion that we need to.
I just wanted to say, Joan, thank you for working through the technical difficulties. Our team says that they can switch and turn off your microphone so you can hear Walter without the feedback. If you have a final thought or question, that Walter would be able to chime in if we switch it over. I just wanted to let you know. It's a little technical.
So do I need to ask the question?
Yes, so he can hear you, and then we'll switch it over, and then I think we can hear Walter without the feedback.
Great. Walter?
Can you hear me?
What is your
Can you hear me though?
response to are we becoming a beloved community?
Okay, so can you hear me? I just want to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You can hear me now. Awesome, thank you, my God. Well, I guess I would have to say you guys are very optimistic. I am less. I don't see, again, when I look at the landscapes that we inhabit, I don't see us placing the care and the kind of view in actually improving those places where people who look like me and others live, even today.
Chris, I think.
Sorry, I think it might be impossible for us to hear each other.
Okay.
I think there's some problem with the feedback.
So you can't hear me? Nothing.
No worries. So with that said, within the context of leader, I had the opportunity, and this is not about me, but this is going somewhere, within the context of leader, I had the opportunity to work when I was an undergraduate and then later graduate school at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And it was mandated that each person who walked through the door of SCLC, if you were a volunteer, if you were a teenager, if you were a child, to the oldest person, and you were concerned about making a difference, then you were a leader. And so literally, when you walked in the door, every day when I walked in the door, no one said, "Good morning, Joan." They said, "Good morning, leader." A child walked in, if he or she were, if they were there to help with the newspapers or magazines or just to help to clean up the office because that was a part of their responsibility, they would call them leader. And so I think that within the context of each year, it's an agreement with Auburn University at this point that Governor State University will always return. And on yesterday, we had 45 members from the community of Auburn, from Governor State University, as well as not just students of Auburn University and faculty members, but also persons like Harriet Higgins, community members. And so I think that in moving forward, that if we would recognize, because each of us are members of humanity, that each of us, no matter what age, that we're leaders moving forward in this effort. And with that said, I'd just like for Ben, Darron, and then Cynthia to give us our words for moving forward. Our words for moving forward. How do you want us to move forward as leaders, those of us in this space?
With love in your heart.
When they looked at each other in the cargo hold of that ship, not knowing where they were, they looked at each other and said, you know, it's us. It's us. It's us. You know, it's got to be us.
For me, in my neighborhood, I am challenged to look at the people around me. It is a nice neighborhood that is overwhelmingly white. And I know some of my neighbors are Trump voters. Maybe all of them were. I am challenged, nevertheless, to be in community with them. And I think about that. I try to think about that every day when I get up, to be in community with them despite our differences. And for me, anyway, that's part of the way forward.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darron, Cynthia, and Ben, and thank you. And let us all be intentional to become the beloved community. We thank you, Walter. We look forward to seeing you in this space. Thank you.
Thank you.